Good morning. I want to welcome everybody to Mentoring Makes a Difference. I want to start off by thanking our attendees today. I know in this era with the number of seminars that are going on and Zoom fatigue, certainly we appreciate you being here today. We certainly know that mentorship is in your heart or you wouldn't be here today. So thank you all for joining us and attending today. The vehicle that brought us here, the Florida Bar Professionalism Committee. This is a committee that meets annually and quarterly under the guise of the Florida Bar. My name is Jason Berger. I'm an attorney in the Treasure Coast, specifically Martin County. I want to welcome you all here today. I'd like to thank the Florida Bar staff. I would like to thank our speakers today, the Honorable Mark Walker, Blan Teagle, Brielle Bell, and Melanie Griffin. I'd like to thank our committee who's worked very hard to put this on today. They will be presenting today and everybody's got a role and a part for today. So thank you all. I'd like to also thank Ita, our chair from the Florida Bar. And I want to say I'm looking forward to a great day. So I want to start off with setting the tone today. I want to take you back to law school. Well, actually, we can go back even further to grade school and high school and college. I want you to think about a teacher or a coach or a counselor or an administrator or a law professor. And I know that by looking at the list and scanning the list, I see that we have at least representation from UF and FSU law. So go Gators, go Noles. I have a degree from both, so I'm happy to say that. And whether it was a judge or an attorney, throughout our careers, good or bad, up or down, there's always been a mentor there for you who's guided you as a role model. I can tell you, and I know you all feel the same, whenever I had a question, whatever had a problem, whether it was legal or ethical, my mentors have always been there for me, and I'm sure your mentors have always been there for you. So the hope is that with all that this profession has given to us, that we give back to our profession. And mentorship is really a great way to do that. So with that being said, I certainly hope you have a great morning. I have the pleasure and the honor to introduce our director, Rebecca Bandy. Rebecca is the director of the Florida Bar Henry Latimer Center for Professionalism. She was appointed in 2018. She is a native of Nassau County. She is a 2005 FSU law graduate. And just this year, she earned and she deserves the 2021 Florida Bar Champion of Professionalism Award. You could not find a more kind, more genuine, and more professional person than Rebecca. So with that being said, it's my honor to present to you our director, Rebecca Bandy. Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you so much, Jason, for those kind words. I am so happy to be with everyone this Friday morning. Thank you to our panelists. My specific job this morning is to introduce you to our first speaker, who I consider a mentor and a colleague that I hold really closely to my heart, and that is the Honorable Mark E. Walker. I'm going to read his distinguished bio really quickly, and then tell you how I personally know him. Judge Mark E. Walker earned his BA from the University of Florida in 1989 and was first in his class. He then received his law degree with high honors in 1992 from the University of Florida, where he graduated second in his class. While in law school, Judge Walker served as senior editor for the Florida Law Review, where he met his future wife, Karen Walker. Judge Walker began his legal career with 3 judicial clerkships from 1993 to 1994. He clerked for the Honorable Emmett Ripley Cox of the United States Courts of Appeals for the 11th Circuit. From 94 to 96, he clerked for the Honorable Stephen H. Grimes of the Florida Supreme Court. And from 1996 to 1997, he clerked for the Honorable Robert L. Hinkle of the United States District Court for the Northern District of Florida, serving as Judge Hinkle's first law clerk. Following his clerkships, Judge Walker worked as an assistant public defender from 1997 to 1999. Then he worked in private practice for nearly a decade. In 2008, he was elected unopposed as a circuit judge for the Second Judicial Circuit of Florida. In February 2012, President Obama nominated Judge Walker for the United States District Court for the Northern District of Florida. The Senate confirmed him unanimously 94-0 on December 6, 2012. Judge Walker has served as a federal district judge since December 7th, 2012. He became Chief Judge of the Northern District of Florida on June 3rd, 2018. I know Judge Walker because first and foremost, I taught both of his beautiful daughters, whom I'm very proud of. When we started putting together the panelists for the CLE, he's the first person I thought of because he's the epitome of a mentor and what a mentor should be. I left my law career to take a little break and teach at a local high school. Child's High School here in Tallahassee is very competitive. I wanted to be home with my then two small children who were, I think Julia was not even a year yet. I think she was 6 months old. So my son was around 2. So they were babies and I wanted to maximize my time with them. I had practiced family and criminal law. The market had kind of stalled. So it was a good time. And I decided to teach. I had taught before law school. One of the first days at work at Childs, a student came to me and said, I need you to start a mock trial team. And I said, well, I've never done mock trial before. And he says, well, let's do it. So that day opened up an opportunity. I never turned down an opportunity. And I said, okay, we're on. We're going to start a mock trial team. I have no idea what we're doing. You get the students, we'll get it all together. And that being said, Judge Walker was one of the first mentors who came on board as a coach. He and Judge David Frank, who was an attorney in town at the time, and then David Grimes, who's also a friend of mine. And we started that mock trial team and the students worked so hard. And within a year, our little team that started from nothing was first runner-up in the state of Florida mock trial competition. So I'm super proud. And it was really cool because we were with Judge Walker as a team as he was nominated for the federal bench. And he was able to give us firsthand perspective about that process. And man, he's just wonderful. He's a wonderful human. He is a wonderful person and he's wonderful with students. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Judge Walker.
Thank you, Ms. Bandy. It's a pleasure to be here. I am Mark Walker, the Chief United States District Judge for the Northern District of Florida. It's a pleasure to participate in this program. Mentoring has certainly made a difference in my life. This program is particularly poignant for me because the most important mentor in my life passed away this March. After I graduated from law school from Florida's first and finest university, I clerked for the Honorable Emmett Ripley Cox of the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, as Ms. Bandy mentioned. I have never known a more decent man. I was a better lawyer in private practice, and I'm a better judge because of the example that Judge Cox set for me. While I only clerked for Judge Cox for a year, he viewed his relationship with his clerks as a lifetime commitment, and he continued to encourage me and support me throughout my entire career. Judge Cox spoke at my investiture as a state judge in 2009. He is pictured here with 2 other judges for whom I clerked. As Ms. Bandy mentioned, I clerked for Chief Justice Grimes of the Florida Supreme Court and Judge Hinkle, with whom I now serve in the Northern District of Florida. When we lost Judge Cox, I was bombarded with emails from his other law clerks, and I'll share just a few excerpts. One clerk wrote, Judge Cox was a great lawyer, great judge, great mentor, great with his family and community, and all around a great man. Another wrote, he was a man of integrity, humility, wit, and wisdom. We need many more of those people these days, and I'm sure we will all strive to be more like him, to set the same examples daily. Another said, I'm a better person for having known him and having had the opportunity to clerk for him. He was both a teacher and a friend whose approach to law made me a better lawyer and approach to life made me a better person. Judge Cox was brilliant, reasoned, and reflective. Perhaps most of all, he was decent. We have lost a great jurist, mentor, and friend. Finally, another said, there are a mere handful of people who have had as profound an impact on shaping me, both as a lawyer and a human being. It's heartwarming to know that he had the same influence on so many in this group. And I received email after email expressing similar sentiments. While Judge Cox was a brilliant judge and left his mark on the 11th Circuit, I believe his most lasting legacy is the impact he had on the lives of his law clerks and their families. Judge Cox proves mentoring definitely makes a difference. Ever mindful of the positive impact that Judge Cox had on my life and those of my fellow clerks, I've tried to pay it forward. While I am no Judge Cox, I've endeavored to follow his example and serve as a mentor to my law clerks. When my law clerks finish their clerkships, I frame a picture of each of them with their school colors and hang the pictures in my office. I want them to know they are remembered and my door is always open to them. Like Judge Cox, my commitment is to serve as a mentor to them throughout their entire careers. I've asked each of my current law clerks to prepare a short video talking about how mentoring has made a difference in their lives and how they hope to pay it forward. The only caveat is I said they couldn't talk about me. The first up is Sarah Logan Beasley, who is my senior law clerk.
Hi, my name is Sarah Logan Beasley, and I am Judge Walker's permanent law clerk. Judge Walker's asked us to each speak about our own experiences with mentors, people who've had significant meaning in our careers thus far. So I think my mentor story, I've had a really happy mentor relationship with a number of individuals before, during, and after law school. But the one that springs to mind is a professor at FSU who, when I was in law school, who really went to bat for students that he thought would excel in a judicial clerkship. So he called me about a week before my 2L year started, and he told me, or first he asked if I had planned to do an externship, and I said, well, yeah, maybe my third year I would. He said, no, you need to do one this year. Judge Walker is accepting applications and you need to apply. You need to do it. And I told him, okay, I'll do it. And as soon as I hung up the phone, I realized I had to reset my whole schedule for the year. I wasn't planning on doing it that year, but he insisted and I applied and I got the externship. And, that was a transformative experience for me because it led to a job with Judge Walker. So I really have that professor to thank for guiding me and mentoring me throughout my 1L and 2L year. Without that, I this door wouldn't have opened for me. So I think that's a really important thing for law students is to have someone like that who helps open doors for them. And I've decided based on that experience, it was so meaningful for me and, people throughout the rest of my career have contributed to all the places I've gone since then. I want to pay it forward. I want to help law students as well. So I have been coaching the moot court team from FSU. I was a former participant on the moot court team, and I've been really enjoying working with law students now. And I find it to be a really enriching experience for me, as much as I hope it is for them. And I hope to continue doing that. And I encourage everyone to do something similar. Find something you enjoy, because it's enriching for the mentor as well as the mentee. And I just think it makes the practice of law so much more rewarding when you have a relationship and a connection with someone who you can help answer questions, help guide them to different doors that may be opening for them, and just passing it forward. So thanks.
Thank you, Sarah Logan. As Sarah Logan mentioned, she discussed how a mentor changed the trajectory of her career. I've got to be honest, I don't do many of these programs, but I agreed to participate in the CLE because Ms. Bandy asked me to do so. As she mentioned, she was a school teacher. That is, she had the most important job in this community before she became the director of the Center for Professionalism. My apologies. We had a technical difficulty, but that's okay. I can soldier on. But what Miss Bandy didn't tell you, she did tell you she taught both of my daughters. What she didn't tell you is that she served. It's okay. I can do it. Again, my apologies. This was my first effort at a teleprompter and it is stalled out. So I'll just go to my prepared remarks. In any event, as she mentioned, they went to, my daughter was on her team, my older daughter was on their team that went to state. We were incredibly proud of her. And it's interesting because if you ask my daughter why she went to law school, she won't say that it's because her dad's a judge or her mom's a lawyer. She'll say it's because of her experience on the mock trial team at Childs High School. My wife and I couldn't be more grateful to Miss Bandy. My daughter just finished her first year at Yale Law School, and I think she's there in large part because of the experience she had on mock trial and the work that Miss Bandy did as her mentor as a high school student. And so for my family, Miss Bandy is the living example of this program that mentoring certainly can make a difference, and I'm grateful to her. We're next going to hear from another of my law clerks, Quinn Ritter, and he has some remarks about mentoring and paying it forward as well.
Hi, my name is Quinn Ritter. I'm going to talk today about someone who is an important mentor in my, albeit short, legal career so far. His name is Daniel Ewart, and I was an associate at his firm for my first year out of law school before I started clerking for Judge Walker. Daniel is a partner at the firm and actually interviewed me when I first interviewed to work there. He's also the one that told me that I was hired, and he was always kind of my contact person at the firm. When I started working as an attorney, the firm assigned him to be my mentor. And in my experience, these sort of forced mentorship relationships don't always work, but in this case it did. He always made himself available to me, even when he was working from the other side of the country. And not only did he help me with the more basic aspects of being a lawyer, like drafting discovery requests or preparing for my first deposition, he also helped me manage my relationship with the firm. Whenever I had some sort of firm-related issue, which, to be fair, was not that often, he would help me navigate it. He would make sure I was getting at least some work that I found interesting, and if I was getting too much work, I could go to him and he would help me manage my workflow. Even when I disagreed with other partners about how to approach a certain case or a certain issue, and I really wasn't sure what to do, I could go to him and talk to him about it, and he would help me navigate the issue without stepping on anyone else's toes. In short, I always felt like I had an advocate inside the firm. And that's not to say I didn't have good relationships with the other partners. I did, and I still do. But there's something to be said about feeling like you have someone you can confide in if you need to. And that brings me to paying it forward. I haven't had much of an opportunity to do so far. I've only been out of law school for 2 years, but I'm doing my best. When I was an associate, I would try my best to help the summer associates work through the kind of issues I had already faced. Usually that was simple stuff like, oh, you got an assignment from this partner, this is the way they like things done, or I wrote a memo on a similar issue, let me send that to you, things like that. It was also as simple as giving law school related advice, like helping somebody decide which journal they should join or something like that. But most importantly, it was just about making myself available, trying to make people feel like they could come to me if they weren't sure how to handle something. That's what I've done so far. It's not much, but I'm excited about doing more in the future. And in the end, I think it's all about making yourself available, letting people know that whatever they're struggling with is not the end of the world, that you've been there before and made it out, and that they will too.
As Quinn reminds us, young lawyers definitely need guidance as they attempt to learn how to navigate the legal profession. Quinn, I should have noted, and Sarah Logan both graduated from FSU. Next, we're going to hear from another law clerk, Thomas Lavoie, who's a graduate of the University of Michigan's Law School.
Hi, I'm Tommy Lavoie, and I'm one of Judge Walker's law clerks. Mentorship has made a significant difference at various stages of my life. Back when I was a paralegal, several lawyers I worked with went out of their way to help me decide where to go to law school, to apply to schools. And even before that, even just whether law school made sense for me at all. They provided me with their perspectives and acted as a sounding board as I figured out what made sense for me. I relied on this existing network again in law school when I was looking into which law firms to apply for. But by then I was able to add more perspectives by also talking with professors, 2L and 3L students, and recent alumni. Talking with more people led to filling in more of the map, especially when those folks came from more varied backgrounds and were at different points in their careers. This broad-based kind of mentorship has always been the most valuable to me. It allows me to hear a variety of perspectives, to flesh things out for myself. It has also opened up a wider network. The more people I talk to, the more people that I seek mentorship from, the more people that they know, the more people I can meet, and the more I can learn. One of the best mentors I had started out as a lawyer at the FTC when I was a paralegal there. I met Chris when we spent a year working on the same investigation and litigation. He left to go work at a law firm halfway through my time at the agency, but we kept in touch. And Chris always offered a helping hand or his perspective when I was applying to law schools and had to decide where to go. He even organized a going away happy hour for me, inviting our former colleagues, and he bought me a copy of Getting to Maybe so that I could do better on my 1L finals. We've kept in touch since then, and I recently put someone in touch with Chris who was deciding between law schools and could use his takes on the schools in the Boston area. For the last few years, I've tried to help out in a similar role for others, as a mentor or just simply an advice and opinion giver, passing along what I've learned from mentors and from my own experience. The people I talk to vary, and they include the other paralegals I worked with as they navigate applying to, choosing, and then surviving law school, finding summer jobs and post-grad jobs, and also applying for clerkships. I've also frequently talked to current students from my law school who I knew before I graduated or who I've met since I graduated. And I also often reach out to admitted students to help them make their decisions about where to attend and whether my old law school makes sense for them. I love creating these relationships and then checking in with people, seeing what decisions they've made, and where they wind up. But something I try to emphasize when I'm talking about my own opinions and experiences is that they're just mine. We're each different enough that we can only benefit from hearing from more than one mentor. So whenever I see the opportunity, I'll offer to introduce the person I'm advising to one of my friends or mentors who's got another relevant perspective to share. I benefited from people doing that for me. I still benefit from that, and I fully enjoy the opportunity to do it for others. Because mentorship, whether being mentored or mentoring, is really just about listening to and talking to people and connecting them with others to listen and talk to.
As Tommy says, an important part of mentoring is connecting folks to other mentors. And so doing, we build an ever-expanding network of support for ourselves and those we mentor. Finally, and last but not least, we'll hear from my law clerk, Niraj Thacker, who's a proud graduate of the University of Florida.
Hi, my name is Niraj Thacker, and I am one of Judge Walker's law clerks. I'm here to give an example about how mentoring has shaped my life and legal career, and hopefully show that mentoring does matter. I started law school knowing nothing about the law, only that I liked arguing about every little issue. I did not know what I wanted to do, where I wanted to be, and whether I had a passion for law. This was until I met my constitutional law professor, Professor Hutchinson. His style of teaching appealed to me. He would cold call, of course, but his questions weren't always related to the rules, issues, facts, etc. of the case. His questions were along the lines of, why do you think the court did that? How would you have done it differently? How do you think politics at the time played a role in the Supreme Court's decision? That was engaging to me, and so I started going to his office hours. Soon enough, I would find myself there once a week debating a case or an issue. Eventually, I became his research assistant. I didn't know it was a mentor-mentee relationship, nor was I looking for a mentor-mentee relationship. At least for me, it was a relationship based on my interest about his work. But soon enough, he started guiding me about my career. He told me I have to clerk, and so he kept up with my application, ensuring I was applying to the right judges, and my application was perfect. When the judge called me to tell me he wanted to interview me, I told my professor. He called the judge immediately. I think it was the next day. He spoke to the judge for a long time. I later came to find out that his letter of recommendation and his call was a principal reason why the judge hired me. But that is not all he did. He even called the firm I worked for before my clerkship. After I started working there, my boss told me I got the job because my professor had called and spoken to the hiring partner. I am certain he called every law firm I interviewed with. In the end, in my short career, my professor, my mentor, helped me get the only 2 jobs that I've had in my short legal career. I didn't ask him to call, I didn't expect him to call, but he did, and that changed the trajectory of my career. It is not an exaggeration to say that I would not be here without his help. So what is the point of the story? The point is, you don't have to look for a mentor-mentee relationship. If you have a passion for a particular subject, go out and talk to the person who is the most knowledgeable about an issue. At a law firm, it could be a case you're interested in. Go talk to the partner about the case and show your interest. The partner may eventually become your mentor. At the law school, go talk to the professor. And like me, the professor may become your mentor. I've learned that the mentor-mentee relationships have tangible and intangible benefits. Tangible benefits will be getting a job. Intangible benefits include importing knowledge from them, understanding how they think, write, research. All of this is helpful, and all of this has helped me in my short career. I know mentoring matters, and so I plan on being a mentor. An opportunity to mentor in a legal setting has not come up for me yet, and so I went out and looked for a program that would let me mentor, and I joined Big Brother, Big Sister. And now I have a mentee, a funny and intelligent teenager who I get to learn from and get inspired by.
As Niraj highlights for us, you don't have to be part of a formal mentoring program. Sometimes the most important mentors in our lives grow organically out of some pre-existing relationship, such as a professor. And I didn't hire Niraj just because he was recommended by the professor. He's also was an outstanding candidate and has an amazing record, but it certainly helped that the professor was so proactive on his behalf. Thank you for participating in the CLE. I hope everybody watching will commit themselves to serving as mentors and paying it forward, because I know each of you must have had multiple mentors in your life to get where you've gotten. Mentoring definitely makes a difference, and this is a critically important program for the Florida Bar to put on. Again, I thank you for letting me be a part of it. And with that said, I hope you enjoy the balance of the program.
Thank you, Judge Walker. And I think I am going to toss it over to Alex Williams, who's going to introduce our next panelist.
Of course. Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to introduce Blan Teagle. He's presently the Executive Director of the Judicial Qualifications Commission here in Tallahassee. Before that, he served for 16 years as the Deputy State Courts Administrator for the Office of the State Courts Administrator, the number 2 person in charge of the Office of State Courts Administration. He was also, for a period of time, Chief of the state's Judicial Education Program, and prior to that, served as the Director of the Center for Professionalism at the Florida Bar. He's been mentoring and training mentors for various professional groups, including judges, lawyers, and law students for about 30 years. Before entering government service, Blan practiced with the firm of Emanuel, Shepard, and Condon in Pensacola. He holds a BA from the University of the South, Sewanee, a law degree from the University of Florida, and he holds a MPS, a graduate degree in pastoral theology from Loyola in New Orleans. I will turn it over to Mr. Teagle.
Good morning, everyone.
I started to say what I'd like to do is see how good of a mentor Alex has been on teaching me how to do Zoom. That was not his fault, that was mine. So let me see if I have learned how to screen share. And I have a little slideshow that I'm going to use to accompany my presentation. So here's what I'm going to do to kind of follow up on Judge Walker's presentation and those outstanding little video clips from the 4 recent graduates of law school. Sarah Logan, Quinn Ritter, Thomas Lavoie, and Niraj Thakur. They really gave us a primer in mentoring. What I'm going to talk about, and will build on some of the themes that they addressed, is an essential and necessary, but not in of itself sufficient component of any mentor program that you want to launch. So I'm kind of trying to pitch my presentation today to, I realize we have a wide audience here. We have some people who are probably interested in initiating a mentor program. We have some people who are probably interested in or have been tasked with administering a program. And then we have others out there who know that they want to be mentors or are at least interested enough and considering it. So I'm going to try to make this somewhat relevant to every one of those groups. And I say mentor training is an essential part of any successful program. If you are going to launch a formal mentor program, I think you don't want to leave the acquisition of the knowledge necessary to be a mentor to chance. You want to have some kind of significant training component for anybody who is going to launch into this effort. Certainly, as we've seen illustrated and as we've heard this morning, informal mentoring happens all the time and is organic and is wonderful. Formal mentoring can be just as wonderful, particularly if it is supported by training. So what I'm going to do is outline the basics of any mentor training program, and then I'm going to do that pretty quickly. And then during the remainder of my time, I'm not going to teach a mentor program, but I'm going to try to widen the view a little bit, go a little bit below the surface and look at some communication styles. And then, given our time constraints today, a finite list of communication techniques. So you can kind of think of these as a few techniques or arrows to stash in your quiver that you can use to good effect in mentor-protege communications. A necessary preface to what I'm about to launch into is that what you're going to get from me today is absolutely a non-exclusive list of communication techniques. It's not intended to suggest to you that these skills are the be-all and the end-all, that these are the only appropriate skills in any given context. If you just employ the skills that I'm going to talk about today, it almost looks like boomeranging questions back to the protege or declining to share your wisdom. And that is certainly not what it's about. I'm just focusing on these because these are communication skills that are often not intuitive. They're not our go-tos, particularly based on our legal training. So my first slide, we're talking about mentor training. Well, why do I have Yoda up there? Mentor you, I can. Certainly, I want to introduce a couple of themes that are going to run through the next 15 minutes or so of this presentation. And those themes are journey and challenge and support. And you'll see that Yoda was a great mentor to Luke Skywalker. He wasn't necessarily a by-the-book mentor. I could quibble about some of his techniques and a little bit of his tough love, maybe. But one thing about Yoda was that he was a guide on Luke's journey. And he was a guide on portions of Luke's journey. But it was Luke's journey. It wasn't his. And although he could give some tough love sometimes, and he could certainly challenge Luke, he was always there to support him. And he kind of held that dynamic tension between challenge and support. And that's something that I'd like us to consider as mentors and to consider in constructing a mentor training program. Okay, I told Alex, if I'm pressed for time, this slide will be my whole presentation. He was not impressed, so I've got a few more slides after it. But just kind of lickety split on what is the left side of my screen, this is not it. And that's actually clip art that I took from a real mentor training program where that was on the front. And so what does that imply? You see that you've got the mentor, presumably the full bucket of water, filling up the potted plant, which is presumably the protege. And I'm not saying that information sharing and providing here and now data and guidance and direction even sometimes is not important. And certainly that picture captures the idea of a nurturing presence of the mentor. The concern that I have with that picture though, is it looks like you are full of knowledge and you are filling the empty vessel. And that's not precisely what mentor is. As mentors, we're not the intellectual chalice bearer filling up the protege with some kind of salvific solution. They have to draw their own conclusions just like Luke did. So look at the other side of my screen. This is it. Who's that? Well, mentoring is a namesake. Mentor is actually the eponym, the source of the name of what we're talking about today. And what you can see on the top right is the only surviving photograph we have from 1200 BC. That, folks, is Mentor, who is a prominent character, if you know your classics, in the Odyssey. And what is the Odyssey? The Odyssey is a journey. Now, it's mostly about Odysseus' journey back home, but it's also about his son, his 20-year-old son, Telemachus or Telemachus, some say, and Mentor was his sage counselor, his wise advisor. Who's that below Mentor? That is the goddess Athena, the goddess of wisdom, the goddess of knowledge. Actually, sometimes when Telemachus was being mentored, he was being mentored by Athena in the guise of mentor. I'm not suggesting that mentors dissemble, but I think it's an interesting story from the mythological past that mentor is embodied by the goddess of wisdom, Athena. So you are sharing wisdom, but you are also doing much more than just filling up the empty vessel. It means you also have to be still. You have to listen and then figure out ways to respond. So here are the learning objectives for a mentor program. They're not the learning objectives for today, but they are suggested learning objectives that I have used over the past 30 years. I started when I was 10 on mentor training. So what you want people to be able to do anytime they're attending a training session and learning how to be a mentor or thinking about becoming a mentor, you want to define mentor for your particular organization or group, because it is a term that is somewhat malleable and subject to modification given your context, and yet it's got some core consistent characteristics, which we heard those students talk about. It's, as Sarah Logan said, opening doors. It is, as several of them said, paying it forward. It is establishing kind of an intimate personal relationship. It is being, to use a term from developmental psychology, generative. It's enriching for both the mentor and the protege. As Quinn Ritter said, it's always being available. It's taking the initiative. It's being, as Quinn said, a navigator. As Thomas Lavoie said, it's a sounding board, not always a talker. It's sharing perspectives, but it's making arrangements and creating opportunities to share multiple perspectives. So as he pointed out, a great mentor is a connector who connects you with other people who will give you their viewpoints. As Niraj Thakur said, there is a dialogue. You are sharing information, but it is a very profound take on the notion of the Socratic dialogue that Niraj talked about. It's asking open-ended questions, which I'll get to in a minute. So I think those students really taught us a lot about what the definition of mentor is, but you'll want to take some time in a program to define mentor. Then you'll want the participants to suggest reasons for a mentoring program or initiative. You'll want them to be able to describe what a mentor does in your particular environment. You'll want them to be able to develop some educational strategies for ensuring success. And then you're there to help them identify resources, go-to people, and go-to materials that will be useful to them as they continue on their journey as mentors. So here's a suggested actual agenda for a mentor training program. In the successful mentor training programs that I've been involved in presenting, we've kind of arranged our agenda around 5 key questions. What is a mentor? Why have a program? What does a mentor do? Why be one? Allowing the participants in the group to arrive at, we hope, a similar conclusion, but maybe a richer conclusion than what we might have concocted as part of our school solution when we were designing the program. And then the 5th question, and possibly the most important component of any good mentor training program, and that I'm going to suggest to you needs to be emphasized, is how do I communicate with a mentee protege? It's organic. For some, mentoring is natural. For others, it's not natural, but there are actually skills that can be taught and learned successfully, even if these aren't your default or go-to positions. So, communicating effectively is the key. And there are some obvious components of this and some less obvious components of this. Obviously, you want to be yourself. You could sense from the little videos that we saw of the students that their greatest mentors were people who were entirely comfortable in their own skin and they were themselves. You could also tell very obviously that they were willing to share information when the time came to do so. In any formal mentor relationship, you're going to want to give some thought, the developers of the program are going to want to give some thought to the formality of the relationship expected in your program versus the spontaneity. And you want to always balance structure and spontaneity. This is a little bit less obvious component, but I want to mention something that Niraj Thakur said when he was talking about his law professor. He said, I didn't ask, I didn't expect, my mentor provided. And so one of the things we talk about in successful mentor programs with structure and spontaneity is it's relatively more structured in the beginning, where the onus is placed on the mentor to make initial contact and to initiate discussions. Frequently, proteges are going to be reluctant to initiate the initial conversation. That burden should be on the mentor. And there's a lot more about structure and spontaneity, but we don't have world enough and time. So then devote the bulk of your training and practice time to learning and using some specific communication skills beneficial to mentoring. And I'm going to kind of race through those. But a wise soul once said, most people don't listen with the intent to understand, they listen with the intent to reply. And I think while Stephen Covey was talking about most people, he may have also been saying something particularly pertinent to lawyers. It's part of our, if not part of our DNA, it's certainly a major component of our training. We are always listening to determine a way to make our next response. So if you want to do good listening, particularly good listening in the context of a mentor-protege relationship, one of the first things you have to do is drop back and know, rather than planning your retort or your response, know why someone is talking. And that really requires you to hone in on what they are saying and consider 4 basic types of verbal communication. Early on in a mentor-protege relationship, there is that getting to know you talk. We sometimes make the mistake of wanting to get down to our checklist or get into the meat, the process and the substance of what it's all about to be a lawyer. And so a tendency may be to bypass the small talk, but sometimes the small talk has very big meaning. You arrive at an understanding of different connections, different interests, convergent connections and interests, and it gives you a platform upon which to build a more enriching and personal relationship. Second basic type of verbal communication, another reason a person might be talking to you is because of the need for catharsis. And you're certainly going to have proteges new to this career who need an opportunity to have a sounding board and to release their pent up emotions. Experiencing another person releasing pent up emotions can sometimes be awkward and uncomfortable for us, and we can want to rush in and fix it. So one of the things that we emphasize in mentor training is how to allow space for the cathartic communication to take place. The two that are probably more in your zone in terms of your background and your training are informative talk, ideas, data, information sharing, and obviously persuasive communication, the purpose of which is to reinforce or change attitudes. You have a tendency as a mentor, a good tendency to want to be developmental, to want to be a teacher, a trainer, a coach, and that's all important. What I would suggest to you is that in many of your conversations and communications with proteges, these four basic types of verbal communication may well occur in the order that you see them on this slide. Don't minimize the importance of small talk. Don't minimize the importance of letting them release their pent up emotions, and consider all of that before providing information, data, and persuasive communication. Why spend so much time in a mentor training program on listening? Because the research is pretty clear. Any resource you look at, listening is one of the most used skills and one of the least taught skills in our formal educational background. So how do we become good listeners? First of all, you become a good listener by being present. One way you can be present is by listening in those four developmental ways that we talked about on the previous slide. Be compassionate. Know the difference between empathy and sympathy, and be conscious and deliberate about which you are expressing at what time and why. And I'll talk a bit about that in a minute. Talk less and listen more. Some call it the 80-20 rule. Be listening 80% of the time, talking 20%. Don't rush in to fill the silence. Epiphany lives in the silence and can emerge from that sometimes. It's not a tennis match. It's not an exchange of courtroom verbal volleys. Simon Sinek, notice the spelling is not as in cynical. There's a difference between listening and waiting for your turn to speak. Sometimes in depositions, sometimes in the courtroom, sometimes in negotiations, we can be listening simply to wait for our turn to make our point. And this is a qualitatively different kind of communication. Now, I told Ms. Bandy that I would address the pandemic and post-pandemic world in which we live, the Hollywood squares of Zoom and Teams that can be exhausting for some of us sometimes. And yet, I think we know that as people get vaccinated and we hopefully emerge from the pandemic that we've lived through for over a year, these tools are useful tools and are here to stay at least part of the time. Most of the mentor training I've done over the years has emphasized the importance of face-to-face, in-person connection between mentor and protege. I am here to say that that's still the gold standard and that's still what you want to aspire to. But these tools can be wonderful because they give you the opportunity to have frequent conversations, sometimes of short duration, to supplement whatever in-person time you're able to have. So it's not an either or, it's a yes and. Here are what some of the experts have said about how we can really use Zoom, Skype, WebEx, whatever you have to good effect with proteges. You want your camera on so that they're looking at you. You want a clutter-free background so there are no distractions. Generally speaking, because it's one-on-one, you want your mic unmuted. You want your self-view hidden because I don't know about you, but with me, if I've got self-view on, I can become self-conscious and start looking at myself and examining myself instead of being fully present and paying attention to the protege. You want your Zoom window maximized, so it's just more like being there. It's two-dimensional, but it's closer to 3. And of course, you want your other devices stowed away so that you're fully focused on the protege. I'm going to talk about 3 tools to aid in communication. I call these the Swiss Army knife of communication. They are the ones that have worked for me. They're the ones that have worked for others. And the beauty of these, if you're thinking about doing a training, is they're pretty easy to cover in a reasonable amount of time and still give people an opportunity to practice them. These are just some arrows in the quiver, as I said at the beginning, not the be all and the end all. So they're open-ended questions, empathy statements, and rephrasing. I'm going to do a little intro on each one of these. So we talked about the 80-20 rule and ask more than you tell. And when you're doing that, use open-ended as opposed to closed-ended questions. And it is kind of a modified, very friendly Socratic dialogue. So here are some examples of open-ended questions. And you don't want to sound like a broken record. I'm not suggesting to you that you jot these down and pepper your conversation with these openers in every instance. These are just some examples of ways to elicit more information from the protege and give the protege more of an opportunity to reflect and solve sometimes his or her own problems without you ever having to come in with the school solution. So what in your estimation went well today? What went less well? I wonder what makes you think that. Have you given some thought to a solution? What do you, if you had it to do over again, what would you do differently? And then maybe come in with your school solution. I wonder is a way that I like to start a lot of questions. I wonder, what do you think about handling it this way? Because then you're really inviting them to enter into a discernment process about whether that's really fits their personality and their style, and whether what you were suggesting to them is something that they can do. Avoid what you needed to do was, well, I wish you would talk to me sooner because what you should have done, or why in the world didn't you? Those can kind of be conversation stoppers. Empathy statements. Empathy statements are not sympathy statements. Some people cringe when I start to teach about empathy statements because they think, oh, this is going to be touchy-feely pop psychology. No, this is a tool. This is an arrow in your quiver. And it can come in really handy when you are strongly disagreeing with what someone is saying, but you want the conversation to go on. So it's not necessarily agreeing, but it is offering an expression of how you think the other person feels. So you're validating, this is who you are, this is what you think, this is at this moment your truth, so I got to run with that. So sometimes also referred to as mirroring or echoing back, which can help the protege feel validated, even if you can't relate. So I hear you're feeling a lot of fear about fill in the blank. Somebody's really upset and going off on something. I certainly understand why you are angry about this. It doesn't mean that you'd be angry. It doesn't mean that you even think anger was the appropriate response to whatever the protege is telling you about. But most of us can understand why a situation that made someone angry made them angry. And it's worthwhile to mine that for what it's worth, to explore it before suggesting an alternative. You can also ask clarifying questions when you're not able to relate, because it might be that you only have part of the story. And if you get more of it, you'll understand it. So you can see some examples there. I won't play Ralph the Reader and go through those with you. But again, kind of some of my favorites, and you don't want to sound like a broken record, but I'm wondering and I wonder are great sentence openers that don't sound too much like cross-examination or a rush to judgment. They're a little bit more like direct examination, but without the agenda that we usually have on direct. Rephrasing or paraphrasing, a little different from mirroring or just repeating, because when you paraphrase, you're focusing on listening first and then reflecting on two components of the speaker's message, fact and feeling. Then you go ahead and reflect back to the protege what you think you heard them saying, what you think that they said that they believed, the problem as they see it. So you can say things like, it sounds like, and then, am I right that when that happened, it made you feel this way? Because they might say, no, 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 you didn't get that right at all. And this is enabling you to put together the pieces of the puzzle before you rush in with a solution. Then afterwards, check your accuracy by saying, did I get that right? That's a lot better, again, than saying, well, I think I get the point, or I think what you meant to say was, no, they probably said what they meant to say. And all you need to do is check for clarity. Then here's a new tool in the arsenal: parallel versus convergent responding. It's closely related to empathy statements that I talked about a moment ago. And this is something that I've read about a good bit recently. And there's one pretty straightforward article, and I've even given you the link to it in the PowerPoint slide. Back in March, this guy named Bill Murphy Jr., if you read Inc. magazine, or if you look at Inc.com, he's a pretty frequent contributor to Inc. He's a journalist, not a communications professor. In fact, he identifies himself as a recovering lawyer. So he's got a legal background, he's got a journalism background, and he certainly knows a lot about communications. And he talks about, I understand versus help me understand. Oh, I know just how you feel versus I'm listening and I hear you saying, or I'm right there with you, instead of I want to be there to support you. So it's a subtle distinction. But what he says, and I do commend the article to you, although the article is about a much broader subject than just empathy statements. But he says parallel statements suggest you believe you've achieved empathy and that somehow this process is now complete, and that it's based on something that you bring to the table, your vast experience. Also, when you say to somebody, I understand, I know just how you feel, in some ways that can devalue their own personal experience, because we may have some insight into how someone else feels, but we don't necessarily ever know precisely how they feel, even though we may have walked a parallel path. Our goal with mentoring and protege is to converge. So what Murphy says is the convergent response suggests you believe the process of achieving empathy is something that is ongoing. What's more, it's not about you and your need to tell. It's all about the protege. And he uses as the exemplar of this Oprah Winfrey. Now, I didn't see her recent interview of the non-practicing royals who have stepped down from their official role, but I understand that she employed some of these techniques in that interview. So it's an interesting article, and it's not very academic at all, and it also isn't too touchy-feely pop psychology either. It kind of hits that happy, informative midpoint. So my closing remarks: be a guide from the side, like Yoda, like mentor, like Athena, like the great mentors that we heard those students talk about today. Avoid being the sage on the stage. When they're done sharing the problem, instead of saying, okay, here's how I'm going to solve it, continue with some questions like the ones that I have there on the screen. And part of that is because often people will solve their own problems if you allow them the space. My closing thought: when time is not your friend, as it is not my friend at this moment, when you can't go broad, go deep, because coverage is not learning. And that's one of the great things about the tools that we've talked about today, including Zoom. You can't cover everything in one mentor protege meeting. So figure out through these discerning questions, what's on that protege's mind? What's important to them today? What's the problem they're trying to solve? And then just go deep into that. Kind of relax and let go of your agenda or your checklist, because you can always come back to it on the next Zoom meeting. And with that, I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Blan. That was very informative. And you also demonstrated the point that mentoring is never complete. It looks like we have more work to do with your Zooming. I, at this point, would like to toss it to Shardine Hill, who's going to introduce our next esteemed speaker. Ms. Hill?
Thank you, Alex. Our next speaker this morning is Brielle Tucker-Bell. She's an associate at Bush Ross. She represents debtors, creditors, and trustees in Chapter 11 and 13 reorganizations and Chapter 7 liquidations. She also represents parties in all aspects of litigation in federal and state courts, with a particular interest in professional liability and malpractice. Brielle graduated cum laude from Stetson University College of Law, and while there, she participated on Stetson's trial team, Moot Court Board, Stetson Ambassadors. Outside of Stetson, Brielle served as Sub-Regional Director for the Southern Region of the Black Law Students Association and Miss JD Fellow. Brielle has served as Judicial Law Clerk to the Honorable Roberta Colton, U.S. District Bankruptcy Judge in the Middle District of Florida. Brielle is also a proud member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. She currently serves on the Board of Directors for Diversity Access Pipeline Incorporated, a nonprofit focusing on providing mentorship and scholarships for minority law students on their journey to Esquire. Welcome, Brielle.
Thank you, Shardine. Thank you so much to the Professionalism Committee for inviting me to be here this morning. I am so excited to talk about a topic that I am truly passionate about. You know, mentorship has been a part of my journey since I was a young child, actually. I was born and raised in a very small city called Washington, D.C., right in the city. And when I was, I believe, in middle school, I was first exposed to the idea of having a mentor. So after leaving DC, I decided to come to Florida and attend the University of Tampa. And while there, I decided, you know what? I think I want to participate in this appellate advocacy course. And that is where I was first introduced to the world of the legal profession. So I am what many at this point will affectionately, hopefully, call a baby lawyer. But what excites me most about today is sharing how a young attorney can really leverage their status and transform the trajectory of their career through mentorship. However, before I get started, let me just say it's never too early or too late in your career to seek out a mentor. So even if you are an attorney who has been practicing for 20 or 30 years, you can still seek out someone to mentor you in whatever goals you may set for yourself. So in my experience, I would say that there are three, buckets that can really transform and make a mentorship relationship work. And those are trust, compatibility, and effort. And to provide you all with just a little bit of a more, a better interpretation of these three, I'll be using those three buckets to share my personal experiences, beginning with trust. So imagine this, you are in undergrad and you are curious about law school, but you never met a lawyer, especially not a lawyer who looks like you, and you really don't know where to start. No one in your family's a lawyer, but you're taking this course and you're thinking, I think I want to go to law school, but where do I start? So you attend a sorority event, it's a regional sorority event, and just so happens you meet someone who is a lawyer. And so you go up to that person and you say, hi, I'm curious about law school. Can you mentor me? Well, if you can imagine that, that's actually how I found my first law school mentor. When I was in undergrad, I met a young lady who is now truly my advisor for life. And I just went up to her without any expectation truly and just said, hey, I'm curious in being in the shoes of where you are right now. Can you help me? She had just recently graduated from Stetson. And so she helped me with my law school applications, the LSAT, and pretty much helped me throughout my tenure at Stetson. Now, that experience is unique to me, and I'm not going to sit here and say that that's how you should go out and find your mentor today, but I believe that that experience shows that you can take a little bit of, initiative as a mentee to seek out a mentor. So in my opinion, right now, I think we can, as lawyers, as attorneys, as young lawyers or experienced attorneys alike, we all have goals. And when you're seeking out a mentor, you're looking for someone that you can trust to help you obtain those goals. So whether that goal is maybe venturing out into a new practice group, or maybe you have an ethical issue that comes about and you're like, who do I know that can help me navigate that? Or maybe you want to join a local bar association. Seeking out a mentor is all about who can I find out to help me reach that goal. And you have to have a little bit of trust. Trust both as a mentee to trust that when they give you advice and guidance that you're going to trust their direction on that, but also you have to have a little bit of trust in your abilities as a mentor to provide that advice to that mentee. One thing that I'm going to mention about one of my personal mentors here, and someone who helps me a lot at my firm, is whenever she's giving me criticism, it always comes with a personal story. So if I'm drafting a document and I have a typo, and to me, it's like, it's just a typo, but she'll look at it and she will say, Brielle, let me tell you about this time where I did something very similar and it almost cost me X, Y, or Z. You know, as a young attorney, we are challenged with not really knowing what we're doing. And if you're anything like me, you're just kind of not really able to talk to anyone in your family who's a lawyer. So, you know, when my mentor sits down with me and she explains to me the circumstances where she has made mistakes in her career or times where it really actually has helped her, it really allows me to be inspired to know that, hey, this is an attorney who has 30, 40 years of experience and she has made a mistake, so it's okay to make mistakes. So you really just have to trust yourself, trust your mentor, trust their guidance. I also want to talk a little bit about finding a mentor. Now, I did mention how I found my first mentor. However, you can also leverage your networks. Now, earlier today, we were listening to a few of Judge Walker's law clerks, and we heard some popular schools. I heard UF and FSU. So I know here in Florida, like I said, I'm a DC girl, but moving down here, I know Florida, everyone here loves their alma mater. So leverage those networks. One of the unique things that we have in this digital age is LinkedIn. So if you are someone who you're looking for a mentor in a particular area, you can look on LinkedIn. You can type in someone who is part of the American Bar Association if you're interested in getting into national bar associations, or if you're looking for a particular area of the law to navigate. Say you want to get involved in, I don't know, like let's say IP law, for example. If you're a young attorney and you're looking to take the patent bar, you can search for these particular skill sets and find someone. But also you can look at those mutual followings and you can ask, hey, for example, I know Melanie Griffin pretty well. I can say, hey, Melanie, I see you're connected with Jason. Can you do an introduction for me? You know, those tidbits can really be very practical skill sets that can help you connect with someone who can potentially provide, potentially be a mentor for you. So now that we talked a little bit about how to find a mentor and how to have that trusting relationship with that mentor, I want to talk a little bit about that second bucket, compatibility. Now, we know that we are in a lot of different groups, courts, organizations, firms where assigned mentor-mentee relationships happen. And in my experience, they have been very worthwhile. I've been very lucky. But there are some times where maybe you're just not compatible at the first time. You know, the first meeting it doesn't really seem like you hit it off. Well, I was recently listening to a podcast, and I truly love podcasts, so if anyone has any suggestions, please send them my way. But I was listening to an NPR podcast on their Life Kit series, and they made an analogy between mentoring and dating. Yeah, that's right, dating. And it was kind of like when you're in those first meeting and it's an assigned relationship and you're not really sure how are you compatible. Is it a common interest? Are we together because of, because we're both diverse, or because we have a particular interest in an area of the law, or maybe it's just a regional connection. It's in those first conversations, I think Mr. Teagle alluded to it earlier today, that small talk can make a big impact. So I would just say, in those first meetings, as a mentee, you want to look at a few questions in the first meeting. So you want to determine, can this person help you with whatever you want to learn? Do they have the time and the bandwidth and the interest in mentoring? You want to ask, are they going to be someone who's going to be a really good listener? I believe we talked about it a little bit this morning. That aspect of listening is it's an easy skill because we do it so often, but the idea of actually listening to someone's problems when they're coming to you and seeking your counsel and your advice, that takes a different level of listening. So when you're in these relationships, when it's the first time, to build that level of compatibility, you can just start evaluating that process, evaluating whether that is going to be a good fit for you. And then also you want to ask yourself, is this somebody who's going to help me stay motivated to reach these goals? Now, I know I'm talking a lot from the perspective of a mentee, but also as mentors, if you are taking on the initiative to mentor someone, you should also be asking yourself these same questions, whether or not you have the bandwidth and the capacity to really make a meaningful impact in your mentee's life. And also another, similarity between mentorship and dating is that while dating is typically a monogamous relationship, you can have as many mentors as you'd like. And so I always use a comparison when I'm talking to a few of my mentees of how many mentors I truly have. So as Chardine mentioned in my intro, I had the opportunity to clerk with the bankruptcy court. And that actually came about in a very non-traditional way. I was at a hall luncheon. For those of you who are not local to the area, Hall is the Hillsborough Association for Women Lawyers. And I saw a judge there that I have a relationship with through Diversity Access Pipeline Program Journey to Esquire. And she looked at me and said that she had an opportunity for me, but it would be dependent on whether my firm would give their blessing. So in that situation, I was afforded the opportunity to potentially clerk for Judge Holton on a temporary appointment. Now, when this all happened, I was 2 months into my time as a lawyer, 2 months into the firm, and I wasn't sure if I should go clerk temporarily or if I should stay in private practice. I was in the bankruptcy practice group. I knew it would be an amazing opportunity, but I really wasn't sure. So I reached out to my mentors, and I call them my board of directors at this point, because I truly had to seek their guidance and ask them, hey, what do you think based on, my goals, we've talked, what do you think, how do you think that this would be in my career? And I really sought their guidance. And I think if you really think about the people in your lives who you trust, who are compatible with you, who you trust to guide your career, you can really think of them as a board of directors when you're making any life-changing decision. And I'm thankful because they all unanimously thought it was a great decision for me, and it has truly transformed the trajectory of my career. Now, I also want to talk about effort. As the mentee, I like to tell my mentees, as well as people who reach out to me about mentoring, I like to share that as a mentee, you're truly in the driver's seat. I do believe that, with a mentor-mentee relationship, there is a hierarchy where you're seeking the mentor's counsel and guidance, but as a mentee, you're the one who's going to drive that relationship. You are typically going to be the one who's going to reach out to your mentor and set up how often you're going to reach out to that person. You're going to try to get on their calendar, and you're going to make the changes that they're going to lead you to. I think for me, I was lucky. I was very, very lucky while I was in law school that I got involved with a program called Diversity Access Pipeline Program, but now it's very widely known as the Journey to Esquire program. And in that role, I was a scholar in my third year, and we had modules where we talked about various different professional development tips. So it was time management, professionalism, mental health and wellness, paying it forward. We had so many different monthly topics where each month I was making changes. So a mentor would come in and they would give guidance to us law students about how we can improve our time management, how we can make changes right now with our mental health so that when we get into private practice or if we get into our career, we're not, overwhelmed. And I think even though I was in a structured program, as a mentee, when you're in a relationship and you're meeting with someone consistently, you have to start making the effort to make those changes so that you can actually see improvements going forward. So in my experience, I've been a mentee in a lot of different capacities. I'm speaking right now about being a mentee in the legal profession, but you can also be a mentee or a mentor for personal reasons as well, as far as, with ethical concerns that come up. And right now, as I'm doing a lot of professional malpractice and litigation, I think it is important for us to know that you should have a colleague or a mentor that you can reach out to at all facets of your career. So I just wanted to put that tidbit in there as well. Currently, I am blessed and lucky that I can sit on the board of directors for Journey to Esquire. It is one of the programs that I'm very involved in. It is the same program that led me to clerking. It's the same program that led me to applying to be a summer associate for the firm I'm currently working for. And it is the program that I hope and can truly allow other law students like myself at the time to really get into areas of change for their career. So if you have any local bar associations or any similar programs in your area, whether it's a program similar to Journey to Esquire, or even if it's your own mentoring program, I wholeheartedly support that you seek it out and try to be a mentor or a mentee. I didn't want to keep you all long. I really just wanted to give you all my perspective as a mentee. I'm so thankful to the Henry Latimer Center for Professionalism for inviting me to participate today. And I'm so thankful that I was able to just share with you all a little bit about my passions for mentorship. I hope you all have an amazing day, and thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Brielle, for that wonderful perspective from a mentee. It was very enjoyable to hear. Next up, I'm going to introduce or turn it over to John Schifino so he can introduce our next speaker, Melanie Griffin.
Hey, good morning, everybody. I've sat through presentations and introductions where the introduction of the speaker is longer than the speech, and unfortunately, Melanie's resume is exactly that. I could go on and on. So, with apologies to Melanie, I'm gonna leave out so much, but there are a few tidbits I wanted to say about Melanie, and I'll turn it over to her. First, she is a shockingly passionate person about the law, and there's a story she tells, and I love it. When she was 8 years old, the rest of us are dressing up as superheroes, and Melanie thought it'd be a great idea to dress up as a lawyer, and she put on her fake glasses, her leather briefcase, and that was her trick-or-treating outfit. And it hasn't changed since then. Her passion for the law and what she does has just grown. She's a triple null, MBA, JD, and her BA from Florida State. And she is remarkably engaged in our profession and our community. She's served as president of the Florida Bar's YLD. She's president-elect of the Hillsborough Association for Women Lawyers. She served as president of the Central Florida Association for Women Lawyers. She sits on the Tampa Bay Area Regional Transit Authority. She's written more articles and given more speeches than I can list. But what I would say about this, she is the paradigm of a true mentor. She's a dear, dear friend, and I've told her this before, I would run through brick walls for her if she asked me to. So it's an enormous privilege. When I was invited, frankly, I had to arm wrestle a couple of buddies just to introduce her, and I'm glad I won. Melanie, you're a dear friend. Love you very much, and the floor is yours.
Well, it's hard to go after that, John. I am so grateful. You totally brightened my Friday. So thank you for that beautiful introduction. And thank you everyone for being here. It is such a pleasure to join you to talk about one of my favorite topics. And to get started in doing so, I put 2 links in the chat, and I initially posted them, and then I separated them out just because I was having trouble clicking on them. So you might as well in my first message, but then they're separated under that. So hopefully you'll be able to follow along. One personal anecdote, John, when you mentioned the Halloween costume and dressing up as a lawyer at 8 years old, I was on a phone conference earlier this week with someone that was new to me and I was getting to know. And he said something about, well, how did you pick your Halloween costumes when you were little? And I thought, where is this guy coming from? And why did he come with that question? I'd completely forgotten it was in my bio. So always a fun tidbit that this has been a passion of mine for many, many years now. So In particular, I, similar to some of our other panelists, have benefited from mentoring because my mom is a social worker by trade. And while that is wonderful for teaching me and others about how to give back to the community and how to connect well and have empathy, it was not great for learning how to participate in the business setting. It also was just me and my mom growing up pretty much my whole life. My parents were divorced when I was really young, and it was just mom and me. And I also then had a hard time when I first entered the practice of law, which does tend to be a male-dominated field, interacting with some of my male colleagues. And so what I quickly came to understand, and this is very much a generalization, especially for the men that are participating in this CLE, I don't think it necessarily applies here, but generally what I came to learn is that unlike mom that gave me instant feedback on everything and gave me a gold star if I was doing awesome, is that sometimes no feedback meant you did a great job, and you were sure as heck going to hear about it if you didn't. And that's when you knew something had gone wrong. But it was a totally different way of communicating that I wasn't used to. And so I needed mentorship about how to succeed in this field. And so with that, then I want to launch into the fact that there are a couple of different types of mentoring relationships. And so if you click on the first link that I have there, which is an article that I've written called Strategies for Creating Successful Mentorships, I want to take you to the first part of that. And I need to share my screen first. So with that, then there are at least 3 types of mentoring relationships. And I like to start here because one of the questions I got on another mentoring panel that Brielle and I were recently on was, I don't have time to mentor. And I challenged the person to say, you know, I get it, we're all really busy, but it's amazing to me that sometimes the mentee is looking for a long-term relationship and they really do want to learn from you over a period of time, like Judge Walker's clerks are learning from him. Other times though, at least when I get contacted, it may be a relationship like that, but I would say more often than not, it's usually around a 20 to 45-minute conversation. And it's someone who's looking for mentorship at a specific point in their career. And so it's not necessarily an ongoing relationship. And so that's one of the things to think about, is to challenge you, is when that person's contacting you, what is it that they are actually seeking? Or if you're the mentee, making that outreach to actually communicate that to the mentor, because that may make a difference, not only in setting the expectations for the relationship, but in terms of both the mentor and the mentee evaluating whether they have time to participate in the relationship. And with that, then when you're thinking about, as the mentor, the different relationships that you can provide and different benefits you can provide to a mentee or a mentee in terms of what you need, we've talked today a lot about the traditional mentor, which is someone who oversees your career and your journey, or at least a particular aspect of it, for a longer period of time. Oftentimes, especially if you're in a formal mentoring program, that may be the 6 to 12 month period like we talked about earlier. It may be a longer or a shorter period of time, depending upon what you decide with your mentor. But beyond that, you may have someone who serves as either a coach for you and or a sponsor. And with a coach, that is someone that, just like when you were a kid and you learned to play soccer and someone, coached your team and told you, when to run, when to go forward, when to kick the goal, this coach is someone who will work with you on a very specific skill set. So maybe you want to beefing up your cross-examination skills or your oral advocacy skills, your opening and closing statements. And so this is a specific person who would come in, help you with that, and then your relationship may be over, or at least until you want to work on a new skill with which they can also help you. And so when you're thinking about that time frame, is it something like that that the mentee needs, and or is that something you could offer that you have time to provide? Something else that is equally as important as a sponsor and as a coach is, a mentor and a coach is a sponsor. And a sponsor is someone who is taking care of you when you are not in the room. And so a lot of times what mentees don't always think about is the fact that your reputation is what's said about you when you're not in the room, when you don't have the opportunity to control that message. And so the sponsor is someone who is influential in your sphere, who has the connections that are necessary, that just like the professor that called Judge Walker and said, this guy has to be your new law clerk. That is the perfect example of a sponsor. That is someone that the clerk did not get the job because of the professor necessarily, like Judge Walker said, that student had to demonstrate awesome skill sets on their own. But that was a tipping point as to when Judge Walker had a bunch of resumes on his desk and he was trying to decide which one do I pick. That professor calling and writing that letter was a tipping point as to whether that person got that job or not. It's the same thing when you make partner, if you're up for a position in a organization, if you want to lead. And so there are many ways you can help out a mentee, and defining what your relationship looks like is important from the beginning. And so with that, what I want to lead into and scroll a little bit further down in this article, if you're following along with me, is what I like to call the critical start of a mentoring relationship. And Blan touched a little bit on this, and I just want to expand on some of the things that he talked about, is that I have participated in both organic and formal mentoring programs. And what I find is that several times you get to the end of a relationship, especially in a formal program, and you'll say to the mentee and the mentor, did you just love your year together? And one or both will say, well, I never heard from the other person. And oftentimes, I think what that goes to is what Blan was saying, is that there was potentially a lack of education by the formal mentoring program. So the organization that was hosting the program just assumes that mentoring is such a well-known term that everybody knew what they were doing. And as we've seen here today, the fact that we're talking about it for 2 hours, while it's a well-known term, I don't think it's a well-understood term. It's much more complex than it may seem at first blush. So I think that's one of the first problems that oftentimes happens in a relationship that's not successful. Secondly, is that that relationship may not have been established well from the beginning. And so one of the things you can do to help ensure that your relationship gets off on the right foot is that the first time that you meet, or at least the first time that you meet in a mentoring capacity. So if you've met organically, say at an event or at a law school, wherever, and now you're sitting down to meet as mentor and mentee for the first time, whether that be virtually, in person, or in some other form, is that you actually walk through together what your relationship will look like. And so going back to my example of, you get to the end of the mentoring relationship and you say to the mentee and mentor, how did you enjoy it? And they say, well, I never heard from the other person. That's because more than likely, neither one reached out and neither one communicated who would have the burden. And the hosting organization also did not establish that. There's no right answer to the question. The mentor can make the argument that because the mentee should potentially show deference to the mentor, that that's the person that should make the outreach. On the flip side, the mentee may say, well, mentor, I'm really respectful of your time and I know how busy you are. So I want you to make the outreach so that we can meet when it's most convenient for you. And neither person is right or wrong. What matters is that you have a mutual understanding so that you can actually connect and have a great relationship. A couple of other questions that I have, not only in this article, but then there's a second link that I put in there, the business case for mentoring that we'll flip over to. But at the beginning of this, there's a great chart that shows the same thing of what you may want to talk about at the beginning of a meeting. So you can look at one or both articles on this, but you may want to walk through things like, how will you meet? Is it going to be via email, phone, electronically, Zoom, a combination? Like Blan mentioned, although in-person meetings can be the gold standard, you may be missing out on a wealth of people by not accepting alternative forms of communication. And what I mean by that is there may be someone that you really trust their advice, but that person, say, is extremely busy and they can't meet with you in person for months and you need advice today. And so what I often do if I'm contacted by a mentee and they say, you know, can I meet with you for breakfast or lunch? And I realize that my time is short for in-person meetings, but that when I'm driving or I'm walking my dog or whatever it may be, that I have several 20 to 30 minute blocks that I could offer them on the phone or on a Zoom, then I'll say that, you know, does the meeting, do your questions necessitate an in-person meeting? If so, let's get that scheduled, but just understand it's going to be further out. Or can we have a meaningful dialogue about what you want to discuss in another format, over the phone, over Zoom? Because a lot of times that does take care of it beautifully. And a personal example that I have there, I, in the fall, was connected through a women's organization to a publicist in New York, and she has been fabulous. We have both helped each other professionally in so many ways over the past few months. But with the travel restrictions on the pandemic, if I had not been willing to have a 20-minute virtual coffee with her over Zoom, and she had been unwilling to do that with me, we would have never met because we weren't both in Tampa where I'm located. I wasn't in New York where she's located. And so we were able to have an awesome conversation with each other over Zoom to connect, quote unquote, face to face, but virtually, and then stay in touch afterwards. And so be open to those conversations and talk about whether that's a possibility, if that's something you need in your relationship at the beginning. You may also want to talk about how frequently you will meet, whether your conversations will be confidential, will you be Facebook friends or other social media friends, how long will the relationship last, what are the mentees' expectations, what are the mentors' expectations, is it appropriate for them to ask for job advice or for getting a job? All those types of things will help to not only ensure that the relationship is as robust as it can be while it lasts, but also that it's not awkward at some point in the future. If you feel like someone's infringing on your personal space, well, gosh, I didn't do this to help get this person a job. Maybe that's what the mentee thought the relationship was about, but you just didn't talk about it in the beginning. So think about that when you have your initial meeting and see how that might help you. I also want you to think about, in terms of preparing for the mentoring meeting, is that one of the things I have grappled with in mentoring is that although I think it's beautiful when friendships arise out of mentorships, and they absolutely do, oftentimes, at least at this point in my life, with having a small child and a dog and a husband and a home and a law practice and becoming president of the Hillsborough Association for Women Lawyers, I am not looking for new friends. It's not that they're not awesome, just not something I particularly have capacity for. And so if I agree to mentor someone, it's because someone reached back their dominant hand to me and lifted me up at a critical point in my career. And I want to return that favor. And I want to, feel fulfilled in that way and have the other person get the skill set that they need too. And so I have sometimes been frustrated then if I go to a lunch or a breakfast or whatever it may be, and the mentee is like, hey, what's going on? And so I think one of the things you can do to avoid that, because I made that mistake as a mentee, I was paired with a wonderful mentor. The organization had taken careful concern to make sure that I was paired with someone who was, quote unquote, I was her mini me at that point in time, and that she would be the person that maybe I would aspire to be one day. And I just didn't understand the awesomeness of that opportunity, and the fact that at the end of the day, if you can't think of anything else to ask, you can always rely on neutral questions like, what is the biggest mistake you've made in your career? What is the best thing you've done in your career? If you had it all do over again, what would you do? What is the number one thing that you look for on a resume? What is the number one thing I should do to increase my network or to make additional connections, et cetera, et cetera. So that is helpful not only if you're a mentee, but also if the conversation is starting to wane as a mentor, start throwing some of those things out there to get the conversation going. And with that, to help mitigate having an expectation of maybe this is a friendship as opposed to a mentorship, if that is something you're experiencing and is important to you to keep that relationship on track, then I've often used the agenda technique and asked that the mentee send me the 1 to 3 agenda items that they want to talk about at our next meeting about a week in advance. And so that signals to the mentee that as the mentor, there certainly, while I agree with Blan, that there should be a get to know you, a social, a catch up that's going to help you give advice and also receive advice from your mentor and mentee. At the same time, then I think it also sets the expectation that after that initial period of the meeting, you're going to move on to the substance of those 1 to 3 issues. As the mentor, it also helps you truly prepare for the meeting, because your mentee may be asking you about something that you need to go look at an old file, or you want to consult one of your colleagues because you're not quite sure of the answer. And so you're going to be a better mentor and be better prepared. And also, again, then have the double advantage of keeping the mentee on track with the purpose of the relationship if you're thinking about setting an agenda for each of your meetings, if that's helpful. One of the ways that a organization can help do that, if it's something that the mentor-mentee are unfamiliar with or forgotten to do, if you are the organization that is hosting the mentoring program, is that on a periodic basis, say once a month, you can send out a topic of discussion. The Florida Bar did this several years ago. I participated in an electronic mentoring program when I was a Florida State student, and I got paired with this wonderful mentor, Melanie Hines, who works at Burger Singerman. I don't know how many people on the call might know her, but point being is that what the Florida Bar would do is the beginning of each month, it would send out an email that would say, this month's topic of discussion is XYZ, whatever it was. Please feel free over the next 4 weeks to discuss this topic or one of your choosing. And so what that did was a couple of things, is that just like the critical meeting of deciding who's going to contact who and when, in case that conversation didn't occur, the organization was signaling to its mentor-mentee pairings, hey guys, it's been a month, check in with each other. And so that's a really great way to help ensure that you don't get to the end of a mentoring program and hear that no one talked during it. It also gave the mentor and mentee something to talk about, and yet gave them permission to go off on their own subject if they didn't think that was the right topic for them that month. If the mentee had something else that they wanted to work on, or the mentor had something else they wanted to work on. And a side note here that I want to make sure that I mention is that when we talk about different types of relationships with the coach and the sponsor and the mentor, is that so many people have touched on then, organic pairings and formal pairings. And Brielle, I know you talked about, all the different wonderful people that you have connected with, and don't just have one mentor, have 10, et cetera. And so with that, when you are establishing your relationships, whether it be with mentors or mentees, not only should you think about having multiple relationships, but also think about the diversity of those relationships. Because just like we've talked about today, I have learned as much from my mentees as they have hopefully from me. And so one of the examples I like to use here is that I have an Instagram account that not only do I love personally, but that I use in my business. And but for having a younger mentee, I guarantee you, I would not know how to use that or have that platform or skill or tool available to me. I also think that you should look at it in terms of not just age, but also people that are different from you, that have different thoughts that you can learn from. What was their experience like, including someone of the opposite gender? Because men are going to approach problems differently than women and vice versa. And I think that I've heard over and over and over again from men and women who have someone of the opposite sex mentor them, that they have been able to get further in their careers because of having that different perspective and input. So think about that when you're forming your relationships. The last thing that I want to cover today, in case you're not sold on mentoring, and I know that we are quote unquote preaching to the choir here because you are the cream of the crop that truly cares about this topic if you're here on a 2-hour CLE to start off your Friday. But with this, I do want to come to the power and the awesomeness of mentoring, if not to sell you, so that you have these tools in your arsenal to sell your organization, whether it be your employer or the entity that you work for or the organization you work with. And that is that there's truly a business benefit to having mentoring relationships and or mentoring programs. And I think these statistics are just staggering in that the productivity of managers who are mentored increases by 88%. That's almost 100% return on a mentored relationship versus a non-mentored manager. So for those of you who have senior associates, senior partners, junior partners that you're looking to have in a managerial type role, having ensured that they have been mentored throughout their career is going to be critical to ensuring that they are successful then as a manager. 35% of employees without regular mentoring seek another job within 12 months. And especially if you are working in that law setting, we all know that the last thing that you want to do, whether it's the private or the public setting, is to train someone as your awesome law clerk. They just understood how you want your order formatted, the research places they need to check out. And now all of a sudden they are moving on to a different job. That is heartbreaking because you have to start over from the beginning. And so you can really minimize the amount of turnover you have in your organization by ensuring that your employees are mentored and that you're creating that safe space for conversations. 95% of mentoring applicants say that mentorship motivates them to do their very best. And it's amazing because sometimes we make the mistake of thinking that money is the driver in a relationship. But oftentimes what we find is that people leave a job not because they were dissatisfied with their pay, that may have tied into it, but more often than not, it's because they were dissatisfied with the opportunities, including to be mentored and to be heard and understood and to maybe take on additional responsibilities as a result of those conversations. So you're going to have a happier workforce if you are in the mentoring mindset. And the last thing here is about money, though, is that mentored workers annually earn $5,000 to $22,000 more than their non-mentored counterparts. And if you are someone who's a mentee, which hopefully, again, all of us are, because we want to always be a mentee and a mentor, regardless of age, because we can reverse mentor, we always have something to add. But here, that not only is a large figure to a lot of us, certainly to me, in a single year, but then think about how that compounds over a career and what that would mean to someone if they were trying to move up and provide for their family or to give back to charities or create generational wealth. And so that can really be a critical difference in their success of their career. And so with that, I know I'm out of time. I hope that you do, though, look at the Spread Your Sunshine blog. It's at spreadyoursunshine.com. There we have a tab that has mentorship as one of its drop-down choices. And so not only are these 2 articles there, but then other articles or webinars. My internet isn't working fast enough to show it to you, but I promise you, there it is, all topics. You can go to mentorship and see other webinars and articles that may be a great resource for you as you continue to work on this topic. So thank you for allowing me to be here with you today.
Thank you, Melanie. Melanie and I were both at FSU College of Law at the same time, and she's one of my favorite humans in the world. And with that, I am going to send it to Judge Batey, who's in Jacksonville, and he's going to talk about resources available. And also, if you guys have any questions, don't hesitate to put them in the chat. Judge Walker is no longer with us because he had court this morning, but our other panelists are. So we're happy to answer any questions that you may have. Judge Batey.
Thank you, Rebecca. I appreciate it. Good morning, everybody. It's been a wonderful opportunity to be here with you. And part of my part is to kind of discuss or get into some questions. I don't see any questions from the panel. So if you have something, please send it in through the chat. But I will say this, I had a lovely opportunity to speak with Nicole Murphy, who will help me in my part with resources and things of that nature. But what I wanted to add is mentoring. Everybody has said having multiple mentors it's very good to do. And I agree. I think that having multiple mentors is important because if you are, as Melanie had said, if you're in a private setting or a public office setting and you have a situation come up, you may not feel comfortable asking somebody within that office. You may feel more comfortable asking somebody else and another mentor in another office, hey, this situation just happened and I don't know how to handle it. And you could get a little bit more of an honest answer, especially if you are frustrated. Everybody has spoken about being somewhat frustrated with how things happen in law firms or in the public sector. If you may be frustrated with your boss, the director that you're dealing with, you can't go necessarily and unload on that person because that may not necessarily be the right thing to do. But if you shift gears and you pivot to another mentor in another firm and just give them the scenario, that may give you that sounding board to express your feelings, kind of get it off your chest, get the anger, maybe if there is any anger associated with it, off, and then be able to regroup and then address the situation in a better atmosphere. So let me see. I've got one question. Oh, okay, sorry. Does anybody have any questions at this time? I don't see anything else. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask, oh, there you are. Nicole Murphy works with the Henry Lattimore Center for Professionalism, and she is going to provide us some information on some resources. So I'm going to turn it over to Nicole and see if we do have a question. Nicole?
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
Hope everybody's well. It's good to see you again, Judge Batey.
Thank you. You as
Rebecca. I am actually with the Practice Resource Center at the Florida Bar, and I administer the Lawyers Advising Lawyers program, which is what I consider our little hidden gem at the Florida Bar. It's a not necessarily a mentoring program in the normal sense, but it's there. It's very quick. It's just a matching program. So, you can't find this form. You have a question about how to deal with a particular area, the bar even. So the attorneys can just go to our website, lawyersadvisinglawyers.com, plug in their bar number, select the area that they need assistance with, and they're matched up with an attorney that's practiced that area of law for at least 5 years. And these are volunteer members. So in return for their assistance to help the younger or someone else that needs help, then they can get up to 5 CLEs per year based on their 20, 30, 45-minute conversation. Does anybody have any questions about that?
There is one in the chat, so let me just throw it out to the group, the panelists, and anybody that wishes to answer it. Here's the question: what are characteristics that a mentee should look for when trying to find a mentor? Ms. Bell, Ms. Griffin?
I'm happy to take that question. So as a mentee, I would say you should write down your vision for a mentor. Start with your goals. What do you want to obtain from this person? And, write down 3 goals, whether it's someone in a particular practice group or someone that is in a, whatever the goal is, write down those goals. And you want to find someone who matches that, because essentially that person has to have the ability to provide you with resources and guidance. And secondly, you want to also look at their availability. And in that first conversation, when you're seeking out the ask to ask them to be your mentor, you should also run by your idea of your expectation of what you're looking for as far as their time commitment. Because as Melanie alluded to earlier today, a lot of the times the people that we want to be a mentor, they also have to have the ability and the capacity to serve as a mentor to be most effective.
Just to tack on to that, I know we have another question, but Judge, if you'll allow me just one moment. I do think there are certain instances that having a mentor who is aligned with your goals is important. So for instance, if you were a law school student and you're trying to decide if you want to be an intellectual property lawyer, connecting with an intellectual property lawyer to find out what does their day-to-day job look like? What degrees do they get in school? That type of thing. I think there's a specific question that is going to be helpful to match with someone, again, who's aligned with that goal. On the flip side, what I've experienced is that especially earlier in your career, no matter how uniquely phrased the questions are, at the end of the day, a lot of mentees are essentially asking the same thing about different job performance metrics, how to get their job, basic mistakes, that type of thing. And so sometimes if you're too specific, then you have a hard time connecting with someone as soon as you need to. And there are a myriad of professionals, not only attorneys, but accountants, people in other industries that might be able to answer those questions on a basic professional level as well. So think about that when you're really building your toolkit of mentors. I ran into that personally, where I was one time paired with someone who's been probably my best mentor. I thought we had absolutely nothing in common. I was so frustrated that someone had connected with us. And that's another way too, is ask someone who you should connect with. But that person truly had a vision of what I needed. And although we were very dissimilar, there were a lot of synergies that I couldn't initially see that you might find.
Very good. Blaine, would you like to add anything?
I'm unmuted now.
There you go.
No, I agree with that. I actually, I have a possible response to the next question. So
Okay. I do have a kind of a follow-up from the first question, and some of you did touch on it, but how do you deal with a mismatch of a mentor-mentee? What's the best way to handle it? And everybody's kind of discussed laying out a foundation of expectations and goals, but how do you handle the mismatch? Melanie?
I think that's difficult, but I think the best thing is honesty at the end of the day. And so it's not necessarily a pleasant conversation, but I think one is to raise it and address it. As I had a mentor that taught me early on, bad news is always better than no news. And then two, if you do feel like there is a mismatch for, whether it's the mentee or mentor, I think it's a little maybe trickier depending upon if you're the mentee, depending upon who your mentor is. Yes. But I think if you can either offering to connect them, especially if you're the mentor, to say, I think that this, I cannot help you as much as I initially anticipated. I want you to get the most out of this relationship as you absolutely can. And therefore, I think Susie down the hall, I've already talked to her, I've already teed it up. And I will say, point of personal privilege, it drives me nuts when people send me someone and they haven't talked to me first. I always say yes, but I always feel happy about saying yes when, say, Rebecca reaches out to me and says, hey, Mel, I know this awesome person, would you mind? I'm always like, sure, send her over. Rebecca sends that person over and the person just says, Rebecca Bandy told me to call you. I'm a little irritated and I hold it against the person initially, and I don't mean to, but so think about that when you're fostering it. But I really think that's the best you can do, is to be honest and to help them connect with a person that is more aligned with them for whatever reason.
Oh, wonderful.
I would just add that my experience is mostly with formal mentor programs where a mentor is assigned to a particular protege. And so one of the things that we try to do, and it kind of goes back to something Melanie was talking about, we have certain ground rules and we have a process. And so I agree with her that honesty is the best policy. And we kind of try to include in our training and coaching for mentors and proteges, be upfront with one another if it's just not connecting, or if your areas of practice are so different, or if you just know that this is not a great combination. But we also have a process. And again, we kind of make it incumbent upon whoever is administering the program to check in and ask the question fairly early on in the relationship, because if it's a mismatch, you're going to know after the first couple of meetings. And then we want people to feel comfortable, mentor and protege, talking to each other. But if they don't feel comfortable, they're going to be asked fairly early in the relationship, how's the pairing going? How is this match? And they're encouraged to be very candid. And then sometimes the whoever's administering the program can orchestrate the switch in a tactful manner if the two are not really able to have that conversation themselves.
Very good. Okay. Brielle, can you add anything?
I think I would just reiterate basically what everyone else has said on those points.
Very good. All right, we do have a couple more questions. What are some absolute no's that mentors should not be doing with mentees? That may be a loaded question, but I'll leave it out for the panel.
Is this the R-rated portion of the program?
It might be.
just kidding. Well, I was thinking is, I think for obviously, I was saying obviously, but the only thing I can think of is sex. I don't recommend that, but who knows? And I don't know, Rebecca, are you like blushing now that you invited me to be on this? But where I'm ultimately going, and what I'm saying, that's my big taboo, is that I have seen so many people that have different relationships. So for instance, at first I thought, well, should I throw in alcohol? But you know what? Depending upon your relationship, they're, going to happy hour may be perfectly appropriate. And in fact, maybe the point of the relationship, meaning that if that person is trying to help you get a job or network with an organization post-COVID, and obviously pre-COVID, oftentimes that networking setting is something that did have beer or wine or whatever. So I don't know, I'd be curious to see if anybody has a different answer. I think what's most important is to, like we've been talking about today, to hopefully, whether it's you doing it on your own or the organization helping to facilitate it, the more you can be honest and have those conversations up front about what makes both people comfortable and get a sense of that and go from there, and what the expectations are and goals of the relationship will hopefully help you set those parameters and boundaries.
True.
Yeah, I was going to say boundaries are so important, and sometimes it's so hard for us to communicate those boundaries, but I absolutely agree with that. Melanie, I did have one, I wanted to follow up with a question. You had talked about learning from your mentees about social media, and I think in this day and age where we're all trying to rush to get tech savvy, and the other panelists as well, if you could maybe chime in on this, what are the benefits of reverse mentoring? What have you learned specifically? I know you mentioned Instagram, but what can you learn from your mentor or mentees rather, your proteges?
Oh my gosh. I would say everything. What I like to say is that my definition of a mentor is twofold. It's someone you trust who can give you advice in that situation. No, there's no age component. And so what I like to joke about is if I was going to go argue my first appellate argument to the Florida Supreme Court, I may not pick a first-year associate unless they have incredible oral argument experience in law school. But more than likely, I'm going to want someone who's more senior that's been down that road before. But oppositely, as you're pointing out, Rebecca, I mean, there's so much that this new generation knows in terms of how to make your practice paperless, how to actually get new cases and communicate with clients online. I have clients that actually, I have an example today, someone I need to call back after the CLE that they sent me, it's not my favorite way that clients reach out to me, but they sent me a Facebook message and it's about a real tangible case at my law firm. So I can't just ignore that. And so point being is that I know as an employment lawyer, I cannot say this, but there are certain positions that I would love to have someone that was of a younger generation fill that position, because I don't want to turn into my grandparents. I want to keep all the time, but there are programs that it frustrates me when they can figure out the answer and I spent time on it, but at the end of the day, I'm so thankful they could, and they hopefully ultimately teach me then to do it. And that's one of the biggest things I encourage you is that if you are in a reverse mentoring relationship, create a system for the person to hopefully give you then that information, meaning like with a lot of the people I work with that are younger, I have them write out the instructions for me. I don't want them to just help me set up the Instagram. I want to know how to log into it when they're back at home, right? And so, have a system for actually capturing that information, because, you're going to learn as much from them as they do from you. And I know that sounds colloquial, but it is such a true statement.
No, that's one of the great and just exciting kind of generative things about mentoring. Just to give you a quick example, my 29-year-old son is a mentor to me. And the way that he's a mentor to me is it's extremely valuable. And I think it translates into what we're talking about today. And it kind of gets into what are the things you absolutely don't do. Also, mentors are frequently and understandably and sometimes correctly interested in passing on the tradition, particularly in a profession like the law. But that's only a part of education. And what I think we're really about is education for transformation. And that's transformation of the mentor and the protege. And it gets into that whole concept of reverse mentoring. So what I love about the conversations I have with my son, not only is he an IT professional, and y'all can tell I clearly am not. And so he helps me with stuff like that, but he challenges me constantly to rethink this tradition that I passed on to him. He challenges my political and social views and stretches me to think in new and different ways. And so I think the ideal mentor-protege relationship has that component of mutuality, where you are going to be open. If you're going to be a good mentor, if you are open to also learning from the protege, and you can do that through some of those communication techniques that both Melanie and I talked about.
Very good. Well, everybody, I have got 11:02 and I'm getting, and this is one of the benefits of not being in person. In person, I'd be having things thrown at me to wrap this up. But now it's a lovely, okay, we're at that time frame. So it is 11, a little bit past 11. I want to thank everybody that has been involved in this and everybody has zoomed in. Please take advantage of a mentor. If you don't know how to go about doing that, there are so many resources with the Florida Bar. You have wonderful panelists here that you can reach out to and they can send you in the right direction. Your local bar. I'm a member of the Jacksonville Bar Association. I'm up in Jacksonville, and we have a committee or a section of mentoring. And we get questions all the time, but please, before you go down a path that you may get swamped in or get into some kind of difficulty, reach out to a mentor, reach out to somebody that you trust and ask questions to help you better navigate your career. I'm going to send it back to Rebecca, I think, or Jason. Jason, I'm sorry. Go
Thank
right
you, Judge.
ahead.
And thank you for what you've contributed today, Judge. I want to say thank you to all of our speakers. You all certainly brought it. I know that I learned something today, and I'm certain that everyone on the call learned something today. Certainly, I hope that we can build from this. Certainly, it's a one-of-a-kind seminar. I want to thank our committee. I see James Steppen. He helped as well, so thank you, James. To the bar, thank you again. I'll leave you with this. There is certainly room for all of us to succeed and to achieve. And by helping others, we certainly can achieve and succeed. Whether you're a seasoned lawyer or a new lawyer, seasoned lawyers can learn from new lawyers, and new lawyers can learn from seasoned lawyers. So surround yourself with great mentors. And with that said, thank you all for attending this seminar. Certainly mentorship makes a difference. I hope everybody has a wonderful weekend, and thank you again.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care.